My name is Emma Walker, and at my brother's university graduation, my father stood at the podium, adjusted his tie with that self-important gesture I'd grown to resent, and announced to a room full of strangers, "At least one of our children made us proud." The words hung in the air like poison, his eyes never once meeting mine where I sat in the back row. No warning, no hesitation, just a beaming smile for my brother and that familiar look of disappointment that had followed me since I walked away from medical school 3 years ago. The auditorium felt suddenly airless. I could feel curious glances turning my way, people wondering who this family failure might be. But what my father didn't know, what none of them knew, was that while they'd been dismissing my little online business as a phase, I'd built a company worth 8 figures. And that morning, I'd driven my brand new Lamborghini to the ceremony, parking it deliberately out of sight. Not to hide it, but to avoid stealing my brother's moment. In the end, they weren't the ones who got to define my success. I did that, all by myself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It was a perfect June morning in Philadelphia. The University of Pennsylvania campus was alive with excitement, sunlight glinting off the historic buildings as proud families navigated the sprawling grounds. The scent of fresh-cut grass and perfumed flowers filled the air, mixing with the almost tangible anticipation of hundreds of graduates about to step into their futures. I'd driven in from New York at dawn, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of possibility. The 3-hour drive had given me plenty of time to rehearse this moment, seeing my family for the first time in nearly a year. My therapist had suggested visualization techniques to manage my anxiety, but somehow imagining my father's dismissive glance didn't make the reality any easier to face. The campus was a maze of identical black gowns and mortarboards, families clutching bouquets, and balloons. Professional photographers positioning groups against the ivy-covered buildings. I weaved through the crowds with determined strides, my cream linen dress feeling suddenly too casual among the pearls and summer suits of mainline Philadelphia's elite. My mother had always said I underdressed to provoke her. The truth was, simpler. Comfort had always been my priority over appearance, another disappointment in the Walker family doctrine. I spotted them near the steps of the main hall, a picture-perfect family portrait. My mother, Diane, elegant in her navy dress and signature pearl earrings, fussing with my brother Tyler's graduation robes. My father, Richard, commanding attention, in his tailored suit, checking his Rolex with impatience. My younger sister Madeline, looking uncomfortable in the floral dress my mother had undoubtedly selected, checking her phone with the air of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. And Tyler, standing tall and proud in his regalia, the gold honors cords draped around his neck, catching the sunlight. He had always been the golden child, following the Walker family blueprint without question. Prestigious university, medical school, and soon a neurosurgery residency at Johns Hopkins. The perfect heir to my father's surgical dynasty. I paused, taking a deep breath before approaching. My fingers instinctively reached for the business card in my pocket. My talisman, the CEO title embossed in subtle silver against matte black. Health Tech Innovations, the company I'd built from scratch after walking away from medical school, now partnered with 3 of the nation's largest hospital systems. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd found my way to healthcare after all, just not through the path my surgeon father had dictated. Emma. My mother spotted me first, her voice carrying that unique blend of surprise and disappointment she'd perfected over the years. "You made it. We weren't sure you'd come." I stepped forward, accepting her stiff embrace. She smelled of Chanel No. 5, the same perfume she'd worn to every important family occasion since I was a child. "I wouldn't miss Tyler's graduation," I replied, keeping my voice light and neutral. Another technique from therapy. Don't engage with the barbs. Don't rise to provocations. My father barely glanced up from his phone. "You're cutting it close." The ceremony starts in 20 minutes, and we need to find our seats. Not hello, not how are you, not a single question about my life or work, just criticism of my timing. Tyler broke away from a conversation with one of his professors to give me a genuine hug. "Hey, Em, you look great. Thanks for coming." His smile was warm, and for a moment I glimpsed the brother I'd grown up with before medical school, and our father's approval had created a chasm between us. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, squeezing his arm. "I'm really proud of you." My father finally looked up, his gaze clinical and assessing as always. "Well, one of you finished what you started." The words were casual, almost offhand, but they carried the weight of 3 years of judgment. I felt Madeline tense beside me. At 17, she was already feeling the pressure of family expectations, her early admission to Princeton barely acknowledged as anything less than her due. I caught her eye and gave her a small conspiratorial wink. "Hang in there," it said. "There's life beyond their approval." "We should head inside," my mother announced, already turning toward the auditorium. "Richard, they're reserving the front 3 rows for families of honors graduates." Of course they were, and of course we would be seated prominently where my father could absorb the admiration of strangers, the successful surgeon and his perfect family. Minus one disappointment. The auditorium was imposing, all dark wood, high ceilings, and tradition. We filed into our reserved seats, my mother insisting on a specific arrangement. My father at the aisle for easy access. He was giving a short speech as a distinguished alumnus. Then her, then Tyler's empty seat, then Madeline. I was directed to sit on the far end, beside my mother's friend Susan, who'd apparently been invited to the family celebration. A clear message about where I stood in the hierarchy. The ceremony began with the traditional processional, faculty in colorful academic regalia, followed by rows of black-robed graduates. I spotted Tyler easily, walking tall near the front of the group, his posture mirroring our father's confident stance. The pride I felt for him was genuine and untainted by our family's dynamics. He had worked incredibly hard and deserved every accolade. The university president welcomed everyone, followed by the dean of the medical school who spoke about dedication, excellence, and the sacred trust of medicine, all values my father had attempted to drill into me since childhood. I found myself sitting straighter, an old reflex from years of being told that my posture reflected our family's standards. And now, we're honored to have Dr. Richard Walker, class of 1988 and head of neurosurgery at Philadelphia Memorial, say a few words about this exceptional graduating class, which includes his son, Tyler. My father stood buttoning his jacket as he approached the podium with measured steps. He had always been at home in the spotlight, his confidence bordering on arrogance as he surveyed the room. His speech began with practiced humility, thanking the faculty and congratulating the graduates. He spoke about the demands of medicine, the sacrifices required, the commitment necessary to excel. As both a surgeon and a father, he continued, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hall. I've had the privilege of witnessing excellence develop firsthand. I've watched my son Tyler grow from a curious child who dismantled household appliances to understand their mechanisms, to the dedicated medical student who will graduate today with highest honors. I saw my mother nodding beside me, her satisfaction palpable. Madeline shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The path of medicine is not for everyone, my father continued, his gaze sweeping across the audience. It requires not just intelligence, but perseverance. The ability to commit to a goal and see it through, no matter the challenges. I felt the implied criticism like a physical touch. The daughter who had quit, who hadn't persevered, who had walked away from the family legacy. Today, as I see these graduates preparing to enter our noble profession, I'm reminded that true success comes from following through on commitments, from finishing what you start. He paused, his eyes finding me for just a moment in the audience. In our family, We've always emphasized that potential means nothing without completion. Dreams without discipline are just distractions. My throat tightened. 3 years of building my company from nothing, of 18-hour workdays and second mortgaging. My apartment to make payroll reduced to dreams without discipline. I'm especially proud today, he continued, turning toward where Tyler would be sitting after the ceremony, because at least one of our children truly understood this principle. At least one grasped the importance of legacy and commitment. The silence that followed felt deafening. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I heard Susan inhale sharply beside me. Several heads turned slightly in my direction, curious or embarrassed on my behalf. My mother stared straight ahead, her profile rigid with feigned obliviousness. Madeline's hand found mine, squeezing once, in silent solidarity. I didn't react. I kept my expression neutral, my breathing steady. I had prepared for this moment, or one like it, the public diminishing, the casual erasure of my accomplishments. It was simply the first time he'd done it quite so publicly. My father continued speaking, but his words faded into background noise as I centered myself. I thought about my team back in New York, the hospital administrators who now returned, my calls, the investor meeting where we'd finalized our Series C funding round last week. I thought about the patients whose lives our technology had already improved. None of that mattered here, in this carefully curated narrative where success had only one acceptable appearance. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. I applauded as Tyler crossed the stage, genuinely happy for his achievement. I watched my father's face illuminate with pride, my mother dabbing at tears with a monogrammed handkerchief. I saw the family I had been born into, but no longer belonged to in any meaningful way. After the final speeches, we gathered outside, on the sprawling lawn where reception tables had been arranged under white tents. Champagne flowed freely, and caterers circulated with trays of delicate hors d'oeuvres. My father was immediately surrounded by colleagues and former students, holding court as he had always done. My mother directed the photographer she'd hired, arranging the perfect family shot with the historic university buildings as backdrop. "Emma, come here for the photo," she called, her tone making it clear this was an instruction, not a request. I joined them, standing where directed. The photographer adjusted our positions, my father central and commanding, Tyler beside him in matching poses, my mother elegant and poised, Madeline and I bookending the group. "Maybe Emma should be on the end," my mother suggested to the photographer, since her dress is a different color scheme. Translation: since she doesn't match our aesthetic, since she doesn't quite fit. The photographer obliged, and I took my assigned place at the periphery, where I could be easily cropped out later if desired. It wouldn't be the first time. Our holiday card 3 years ago had featured a family photo from my cousin's wedding, with me neatly trimmed from the edge after I'd announced my decision to leave medical school. "Smile, everyone," the photographer instructed. "This is a happy day." I complied, my face arranging itself into the socially acceptable expression of joy that had nothing to do with my actual feelings. Another skill perfected over years of Walker family events. After photos, I mingled briefly with extended family members I rarely saw. Uncle James, my father's brother and fellow physician, asked perfunctory questions about that internet thing you're doing, his tone making it clear he considered it a hobby rather than a career. Aunt Patricia commented that I looked tired and suggested that regular hours in a proper profession might help with that. My cousin Blake, halfway through dental school, avoided eye contact entirely, as though failure might be contagious. I was reaching for a glass of water when I overheard my father speaking to the parents of one of Tyler's classmates. "Both my children were always academically gifted," he was saying, his voice carrying that casual authority he wielded so effortlessly. But Tyler understood the value of applying that gift properly. Emma got distracted by... He paused, searching for a suitably dismissive phrase. Entrepreneurial fantasies. I froze, the glass halfway to my lips. Such a shame, the other father replied, especially with the connections you could have provided. Was it the pressure? Some kids just can't handle the rigor of medical training. We tried to instill discipline, my father sighed, as though discussing a particularly challenging patient case. But you can lead a horse to water, as they say. I set the untouched water down and walked away before I could hear more, making my way to a quiet corner of the garden where ancient oak trees provided both shade and privacy. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from my COO about our upcoming product launch. The real world, my world, reminding me of its existence beyond this suffocating bubble of academia and family expectation. I was responding to the message when Madeline found me. She dropped onto the bench beside me, kicking off her uncomfortable heels with a sigh of relief. "Dad's in rare form today," she said, leaning her head against my shoulder. "Extra insufferable with all these people telling him how amazing he is." I smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "How are you holding up? Princeton preparations? Going okay?" She shrugged. "I guess." Mom's already joined 3 parent groups and started interviewing decorators for my dorm room. Dad keeps introducing me to neurologists, even though I've told him 1,000 times I'm interested in environmental science. "The Walker family specialties, selective hearing and strategic ignorance," I said, earning a small laugh. "I miss you," she said simply. "Everything's worse when you're not around to deflect some of the attention." Guilt twisted in my stomach. In escaping our parents' disappointment, I'd left Madeline to bear more of it alone. "I'm sorry, Mads. You know, you can visit any time, right? My guest room in New York is basically yours." "I know. Maybe this summer if they'll let me." The "if" hung between us, acknowledgement of the control our parents still exerted over her life. "So," she continued, her voice brightening artificially, "when are you going to tell them about the company? About how well you're actually doing?" I sighed. What would be the point? Dad's decided his version of the story is that I failed. No amount of evidence will change that narrative for him. "But you didn't fail. You just succeeded at something different. Something better, honestly." Her faith in me was touching, if naive. To him, walking away from medicine was the failure. Everything after that is just me playing pretend. I squeezed her shoulder. "It's okay. I made peace with his disappointment a long time ago." "Well, I haven't," she muttered. "It's so unfair, and Tyler gets worshipped just for doing exactly what Dad wanted. He didn't even have to think for himself." "Hey," I said gently. "Tyler worked incredibly hard. He deserves his success, even if the path was pre-approved. Don't diminish that just because Dad's being Dad." She nodded reluctantly. "I know, I just hate how they treat you." "Which is exactly why I live 3 hours away and visit only on special occasions," I replied with a wry smile. "Speaking of which, I should probably make an appearance at the main reception before I head back to the city." "You're not staying for dinner?" Alarm flashed across her face. "Mom's arranged this whole thing at Le Bernardin. The reservation's for 6 people." I frowned. 6? Who else besides the 5 of us? "Tyler's girlfriend. Melissa is joining us. Didn't they tell you about dinner?" Of course they hadn't. They'd assumed I wouldn't attend the graduation at all, or they'd deliberately excluded me from the family celebration. Either way, the message was clear. "I have an early meeting tomorrow," I said, the lie coming easily. "I need to get back to New York tonight." Disappointment clouded her features, but she nodded in understanding. We both knew the real reason I was leaving early. Another family dinner meant another few hours of subtle jabs and dismissive comments, of questions not asked and achievements not acknowledged. As we walked back toward the main reception, I spotted Tyler surrounded by friends and faculty, accepting congratulations with the easy confidence that came from never doubting your place in the world. He caught my eye and excused himself, making his way over to us. "Hey, there you are," he said, genuine warmth in his voice. "I've been looking for you. Some of us are heading to Franklin's for drinks after this wraps up. You should join." I smiled at the invitation, remembering when we'd been closer, before our parents' expectations had created such different paths for us. "Thanks, but I need to head back to New York. Early start tomorrow." "On a Saturday?" His brow furrowed in confusion. "Can't you reschedule? We hardly ever see you anymore." I hesitated, torn between the easy excuse and the more complicated truth. It's not just the meeting, Ty. It's all of this. I gestured vaguely at the reception, at our father holding court near the champagne fountain. "I'm happy for you, really. But I don't need another evening of being reminded I'm the family disappointment." His expression shifted from confusion to discomfort. Dad didn't mean anything by what he said. You know how he gets at these formal things, all about appearance and legacy and stuff. Except he did mean it, I countered gently. And you know, it too. It's okay. I've made my peace with it. He started to protest, then stopped, honesty winning out over family loyalty for once. "I'm sorry," he said finally. What he said wasn't fair. "You're incredibly successful. I brag about you to my friends all the time." This surprised me. "You do?" "Of course I do. My sister, the tech CEO, the one whose company got written up in Forbes last month, that's way cooler than being another doctor in the family." I felt a rush of affection for him. This glimpse of the brother who had once been my closest ally before our parents' expectations had driven us in different directions. "Thanks, Ty. That means a lot." "So, will I see you at dinner at least?" he asked hopefully. I shook my head. "Not this time. But let's plan something in New York soon, okay? Just us." He nodded, understanding what I wasn't saying. Some battles weren't worth fighting, and some dinners weren't worth enduring. We hugged goodbye, and I promised to call him next week. As I made my way toward the exit, I passed the table where my parents were speaking with the dean of the medical school. My mother spotted me and excused herself, intercepting me before I could leave. "You're not saying goodbye to your father?" Her tone made it both a question and an accusation. "He seems busy," I replied neutrally. "Please tell him I said congratulations again on Tyler's achievement." She frowned. "Emma, I know you and your father have your differences. But would it kill you to make more of an effort? Today is about family." I took a measured breath. "I came to support Tyler. I've done that. Now I need to get back to work." "Always rushing off to that little company of yours," she sighed. "I do wish you'd reconsider finishing your degree. Dr. Levinson still speaks so highly of your potential, and there are excellent programs that might accept transfer credits." "Mom?" I interrupted gently but firmly. "I'm 30 years old. I run a successful healthcare technology company. I'm not going back to medical school." "Well, you can't blame us for wanting better for you," she replied, adjusting her pearls, a nervous habit I'd observed since childhood. "We just want you to have a real career." There it was again, the dismissal of everything I'd built, everything I'd accomplished without their approval or support. I could have told her about our recent acquisition, about the hospital system that had just signed a multi-million-dollar contract for our patient monitoring platform. I could have mentioned the award I'd received last month from the Healthcare Innovation Summit, or the research partnership we'd established with her precious University of Pennsylvania, but I didn't. Because none of it would matter. In their narrative, I would always be the daughter who quit, who failed, who didn't have what it took to follow the path they'd chosen. "I should go," I said simply. Congratulations again on Tyler's graduation. It was a lovely ceremony. She leaned in for another stiff hug, her perfume enveloping me in memories of 1,000 other disappointing interactions. "Drive safely," she said, her standard goodbye that somehow always sounded like an instruction rather than concern. I walked away without looking back, navigating through groups of celebrating families toward the parking area where I'd left my car. The Lamborghini Urus sat gleaming in the afternoon sun, its sleek lines and distinctive presence a stark contrast to the sensible luxury sedans and SUVs that surrounded it. I hadn't bought it to show off. I'd bought it because after years of denying myself even small indulgences to reinvest everything in the company, I'd finally wanted to celebrate our success in a tangible way. As I approached, I noticed a small group of graduates had gathered nearby, admiring the vehicle with open appreciation. I smiled, unlocking it with the key fob. Their eyes widened as they realized I was the owner. "Excuse me," one of them called, as I opened the driver's door. "Is this the new Urus? It's incredible." "It is," I confirmed, unable to suppress a small surge of pride. "Would you like to take a closer look?" They approached eagerly, asking questions about performance specs and features that I answered with growing enthusiasm. There was something liberating about this simple interaction. Being recognized and respected for a choice I'd made, a symbol of success I'd earned on my own terms. We were discussing the customized interior when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Emma, you're leaving?" I turned to find my father standing there looking genuinely perplexed for the first time I could remember. His gaze moved from me to the Lamborghini and back again, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been grudging reassessment. "Yes," I answered simply. "I have meetings in New York tomorrow." He continued, staring at the car as though it were a medical anomaly he couldn't quite diagnose. "This is yours?" "It is." I didn't elaborate, didn't explain, didn't justify. "I see." But it was clear he didn't. Not really. His worldview had no place for this version of me, successful on my own terms, displaying wealth he couldn't dismiss as insignificant. "Your mother mentioned you won't be joining us for dinner." It wasn't quite a question, but I answered anyway. "That's right. Please give Tyler my best." He nodded distractedly, still processing the incongruity between his narrative of my life and the evidence before him. "Well, safe travels then. No questions about my company. No curiosity about how I could afford a vehicle worth more than his annual salary. Just the same dismissal, slightly tempered by confusion." I said goodbye to the admiring graduates and slid into the driver's seat, the engine purring to life with a satisfying rumble. As I navigated carefully out of the parking area, I caught a glimpse of my father in the rearview mirror, still standing where I'd left him, watching as I drove away from his carefully constructed version of success and toward the life I'd built for myself. The open highway stretched before me, and with each mile between Philadelphia and New York, I felt the weight of expectation and judgment lifting. By the time I crossed into New Jersey, I was smiling. By Connecticut, I was singing along to the playlist I reserved for celebrating company victories. My phone buzzed with a text from Madeline. "Dad hasn't stopped talking about your car. Mom looks like she swallowed a lemon. Wish you could see their faces." I laughed out loud in the empty car. It wasn't about revenge or proving them wrong. It never had been. But there was a certain poetic justice in having my success be so visible, so undeniable, on the very day my father had tried once again to diminish it. Tomorrow, I would return to my company, to the team that believed in my vision, to the work that mattered to me. And someday, perhaps my parents would recognize that there were many paths to a meaningful life, many definitions of success beyond the narrow one they'd prescribed. But even if that day never came, I knew my own worth. And that, more than any luxury car or company valuation, was the true measure of how far I'd come. The drive back to my apartment in New York that evening seemed longer than usual, the Lamborghini's engine purring beneath me as I navigated through weekend traffic. My mind kept replaying my father's words at the podium, the casual cruelty of his public dismissal. At least one of our children made us proud. The statement had crystallized years of unspoken judgment into a single devastating sentence. I hadn't fled the graduation in tears or shame, though. I'd simply recognized it was time to leave, sliding into my car with the composed demeanor I'd perfected during board meetings and investor pitches. The vehicle, a purchase I'd deliberated over for months before finally indulging, had never been intended as a statement. It was simply a personal reward after years of sacrifice, of 18-hour workdays and reinvested profits and deferred gratification while building health tech innovations. Yet the look on my father's face when he saw me getting into it had been worth every penny of the six-figure price tag. Not because I wanted to hurt him or prove something, but because for one unguarded moment, reality had penetrated his carefully constructed narrative about my life choices. By the time I reached my Tribeca loft, it was past midnight. I kicked off my heels by the door, poured a generous glass of Cabernet, and sank into the window seat overlooking the city lights. My phone had been uncharacteristically silent. No messages from my mother expressing obligatory concern. No diplomatic text from Tyler trying to smooth things over. The absence of communication spoke volumes about how deeply entrenched the family dynamics had become. I considered calling Madeline, checking if she was okay after witnessing that public spectacle, but decided against it. My 17-year-old sister was still living under their roof, still subject to their approval. Better not to put her in the middle of this particular battlefield. Instead, I opened my laptop and immersed myself in work, the most reliable sanctuary I'd found since walking away from medical school. The pending hospital contracts needed review. The investor update needed finalization. The clinical trial data needed analysis. Real, tangible problems with actual solutions, unlike the intractable complexity of family disappointment. I must have fallen asleep on the couch because the insistent buzz of my phone woke me just after dawn. The screen showed Maya's name. My COO rarely called on weekends unless something significant was happening. "Please tell me you're calling with a business emergency that requires my immediate attention," I answered, my voice still rough with sleep. "Better," she replied, an undercurrent of excitement in her tone. The Journal of Medical Technology just published their annual innovation rankings. We're number 3, Emma, third most innovative medical technology company in the country. I sat up, suddenly wide awake. That's not possible. We weren't even in the top 15 last year. The clinical trial results changed everything. The article specifically cites our patient outcome improvements as revolutionary and paradigm-shifting. They're calling us the future of predictive healthcare. The recognition was substantial, not just industry validation, but the kind of high-profile acknowledgement that could accelerate our growth trajectory significantly. Hospitals that had been hesitant to adopt our monitoring system would now be calling us, not the other way around. "There's more," Maya continued, clearly enjoying being the bearer of extraordinary news. "Braden Mercer's office reached out and an hour ago. He wants to discuss acquisition possibilities." I nearly dropped the phone. Braden Mercer's medical technology conglomerate was the industry giant, the company everyone aspired to partner with or be acquired by. They didn't approach startups unless they saw exceptional value and growth potential. "This is unexpected," I managed, my mind racing through implications and possibilities. "That's one word for it," Maya agreed, though I prefer vindication or perhaps karmic justice, given the timing. "Timing? Emma, you just came from your brother's graduation where your family essentially disowned you again, and 12 hours later, your company is being recognized as an industry leader and courted by Mercer Global. If that's not the universe delivering a cosmic high five, I don't know what is. I laughed despite myself. When you put it that way, it does seem rather poetically timed. How was it, by the way, the graduation? You never actually told me. What happened? I sighed, the previous day's events flooding back. About as expected. My father used his speech to publicly announce that Tyler's achievements reflected the family values, while my choices did not. Standard Walker Family Theater, just with an audience this time. Maya's silence conveyed more than words could have. The bitey, protective indignation of someone who had witnessed the toll my family's disapproval had taken over the years, even as I'd built something remarkable despite it. Well, she said finally, I hope you're planning to send them the journal ranking with a particularly elegant arrangement of flowers. Perhaps roses spelling out, I told you so, in the language of botanical vindication. Tempting, I admitted, but unnecessary. Success without their approval was always the goal. Their recognition or lack thereof is incidental at this point. We discussed logistics for the coming week, preparing for Mercer's inquiry, leveraging the journal ranking, in our marketing, finalizing the Chicago hospital implementation. By the time we hung up, I felt centered again, focused on the future rather than the previous day's painful confrontation. I was halfway through my morning run in Central Park when my phone buzzed with a text from Madeline. Mom and Dad fighting. All morning. Dad keeps saying you manipulated the journal rankings with flashy marketing rather than actual medical innovation. Mom asking if she should call you. Please advise on preferred response. I smiled despite myself, impressed by my sister's ability to report family dynamics with such journalistic detachment. I slowed to a walk, considering my response carefully. Madeline was in a difficult position, still dependent on our parents, but increasingly aware of the manipulation and control tactics they employed. Tell Mom I'm busy with work, but appreciate her concern, I typed back. And don't worry about Dad's theories. The journal's evaluation process involves extensive peer review and clinical validation. No amount of marketing could influence their rankings. Her response came quickly. Already took screenshot of their methodology to show him. He moved on to questioning your sustainable business model. Also found your company profile in Forbes. Subscription suddenly worth every penny. I laughed out loud, earning curious glances from passing joggers. Madeline's quiet rebellion, gathering facts to counter our father's dismissive narrative, was both touching and concerning. I didn't want her relationship with our parents to suffer because she was defending me, but I also recognized her need to establish her own perspective amid the family mythology. Just focus on your Princeton prep, I advised. Their opinions about my career choices aren't your responsibility to manage. Too late, she replied. Already your official family PR representative, considering business cards. I was still smiling at her message when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Normally, I'd let unknown calls go to voicemail, especially on weekends, but given the morning's developments, I decided to answer. Emma Walker, I said, resuming my jog at a slower pace. Ms. Walker, this is Rebecca Chen from the New York Times business section. I'm working on a feature about women-led healthcare technology companies, and your name keeps coming up, especially after this morning's journal rankings. Would you be available for an interview next week? The request caught me off guard. Over. The past 4 years, I'd done my share of industry publications and technology blogs, but mainstream media coverage was a significant escalation in visibility. I'd be interested in learning more, I replied cautiously. What exactly would the feature focus on? We're looking at innovative approaches to healthcare disruption, particularly companies addressing systemic inefficiencies or preventable errors. Your predictive monitoring system seems to be doing exactly that, and with impressive clinical validation. She paused. We're also interested in your personal journey, leaving medical school to build a technology solution to problems you observed firsthand. It's a compelling narrative. The thought of discussing my decision to leave medicine, the very choice my family had never accepted, in such a public forum gave me pause. Not because I regretted the path I'd taken, but because I'd worked hard to build my company's reputation on technological innovation and clinical outcomes, not personal storytelling. I'd prefer to focus on the technology and its impact rather than personal background, I said carefully. Our mission is about improving patient care through predictive analytics, not about my individual journey. Of course, she agreed smoothly, though I could hear the slight disappointment in her tone. Human interest elements sold more papers than technical innovation, no matter how life-saving. Perhaps we could at least touch on your transition from medical student to tech CEO. That perspective would be valuable to readers considering similar pivots. We negotiated the parameters of the potential interview, what would be discussed, what would remain private, how the company would be portrayed. By the time I hung up, we'd scheduled a preliminary conversation for Tuesday with her editor, with the understanding that I maintained approval rights over how my personal history would be framed. As I completed my run and headed back to my apartment, I found myself contemplating what it would mean to publicly discuss the very decision that had created the rift with my family. For years, I'd compartmentalized that aspect of my life, focusing on building something meaningful rather than dwelling on what I'd walked away from. The potential Times feature would inevitably bridge those separate worlds. I was still considering the implications when my building's doorman handed me a heavy cream envelope that had been delivered by courier. I recognized my mother's distinctive stationery immediately. The timing was suspicious, just hours after the journal ranking was published, after 4 years of minimal communication about my professional life. In my apartment, I opened the envelope cautiously, half expecting a thinly veiled criticism packaged as concern. Instead, I found an invitation to a charity gala the following weekend at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, accompanied by a handwritten note. Your father is receiving the Physician Leadership Award. Your presence would be appropriate given the family occasion. Black tie. Please confirm attendance. Mother. No congratulations on the journal ranking. No acknowledgement of my company's success. Just an expectation that I would appear at an event celebrating my father, playing the role of supportive daughter, despite his public dismissal of my life choices just 24 hours earlier. The presumption was so typically Walker family that I almost laughed. Of course, the invitation would arrive now, not because they were proud of my achievements or wanted to reconcile, but because my suddenly higher profile made my absence from family events more conspicuous. It was about appearances, as always. I set the invitation aside, neither accepting nor declining yet. The timing presented an interesting dilemma. Attending would signal that I valued family connection despite our differences, a mature, magnanimous gesture. But it would also potentially reinforce the dynamic that had caused so much damage, my legitimate concerns and choices being subordinated to family image management. My phone buzzed with another text from Madeline. They've seen the Times reporter's email requesting an interview. Dad calling his PR guy. This is not a drill. I sighed, unsurprised that my father was already mobilizing resources to manage the potential narrative. Richard Walker, MD, fax, had built his reputation with the same meticulous attention to public perception that he dedicated to his surgical techniques. The possibility of his estranged daughter discussing her reasons for leaving medicine in a major publication would represent a significant threat to the carefully curated family image. Thanks for the heads up, I replied to Madeline. Nothing to worry about. The interview will focus on healthcare technology, not family dynamics. Her response was immediate and uncharacteristically blunt. Dad seems to think otherwise. Direct quote, "We need to get ahead of whatever revisionist history Emma's planning," to share about her departure from medical school. Mom suggested having their publicist reach out to coordinate messaging. I'm hiding in my room to avoid being recruited for Operation Control the Narrative. The description was so accurate it was almost comical. Exactly how our parents would approach any situation that threatened their preferred version of reality. I could picture my father pacing his study, phone pressed to his ear as he deployed his network of connections to influence the interview process. My mother would be making lists of talking points and acceptable phrasings, attempting to sanitize a complex reality into something that could be comfortably discussed at country club luncheons. "Stay out of the crossfire," I advised Madeline. "This isn't your battle." "Too late," she replied. "Already drafted as family intelligence operative. Dad just asked if I know which Times editor you're meeting with. Claimed ignorance. Will continue reporting from enemy territory." I smiled at her spy movie framing of the situation, though I was genuinely concerned about her position. At 17, Madeline was perceptive enough to recognize the manipulation, but still vulnerable to parental pressure. The last thing I wanted was for her to become collateral damage in this renewed conflict between my parents' narrative control and my professional autonomy. My contemplation was interrupted by an incoming call, Tyler. I hesitated before answering, unsure where my brother stood in this evolving situation. He had always occupied an uncomfortable middle ground, the golden child who met parental expectations while occasionally expressing private support for my choices. "Hey," I answered cautiously. "Emma." His voice held an unusual tension. "Have you seen the journal rankings?" "I have. Quite a surprise." "That's quite an understatement. Your company jumped 12 spots to number 3. The article practically canonizes your predictive monitoring system." I couldn't tell from his tone whether he was impressed, concerned, or simply conveying information. "The clinical trial data made a compelling case," I said neutrally. He was quiet for a moment. "Dad's not taking it well," he finally offered. His voice lowered as though concerned about being overheard despite being at his own apartment in Philadelphia. "The timing, coming right after graduation, has him convinced you orchestrated it somehow." The accusation was so absurd I nearly laughed. "Yes, Tyler. I secretly control the editorial calendar and peer review process of the Journal of Medical Technology. It's all part of my master plan to upstage your graduation 24 hours after the fact." "I know it's ridiculous," he acknowledged, a hint of his own frustration bleeding through. "But you know how he gets when his narrative is challenged. And now with the Times interview request." "How does he even know about that already?" I interrupted, genuinely curious about the information flow. "The reporter only contacted me this morning." Tyler hesitated. "Apparently Andrew Coleman's wife works at the Times. Not in the business section, but she heard about the feature and mentioned it to him at some function last night. He called Dad first thing this morning. The Walker family network at work, the E-Thaw. Same connections that had once seemed like advantages now functioning as a surveillance system to monitor my movements in professional spaces they couldn't directly control. Well, you can tell Dad the interview will focus on healthcare technology innovation, not family drama. I have no interest in discussing my departure from medicine or our family dynamics in the New York Times. That would be helpful if he were thinking rationally, Tyler replied, his voice still low. But he's convinced this is your way of publicly validating your decision to leave medicine, of undermining his, I don't know, his authority or something. My company's success validates my decision, I pointed out, unable to keep a hint of sharpness from my tone. I don't need a newspaper article for that. Tyler sighed, the sound carrying a weariness that suggested he'd been managing our father's reactions for hours. I know that. You know that. But Dad sees this as some kind of zero-sum game where your success somehow diminishes his influence or legacy. The assessment was unfortunately accurate. Our father had never been able to see my departure from medicine as anything but rejection of him, of his values, of the path he'd prescribed. My subsequent success in a field adjacent to but distinct from his only complicated that narrative rather than resolving it. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this, I said, genuinely empathetic to Tyler's position. Despite being the favored child, he carried his own burdens, the weight of parental expectations fulfilled but constantly reinforced, the pressure to maintain the approval that came with compliance. "It's fine," he replied automatically, then amended, "Well, not fine exactly, but familiar territory. Listen, the reason I'm calling, other than to congratulate you on the ranking, which is genuinely impressive, is to ask if you're planning to attend the gala next weekend." "I just received the invitation about 20 minutes ago," I told him, glancing at the heavy cream envelope still sitting on my kitchen counter. "I haven't decided yet." "I think you should come," he said, surprising me with his directness. "Not for Dad's ego or Mom's social image management, but because you deserve to be there. Your company is doing important work that's being recognized at the highest levels. Walking into that event as a healthcare innovator in your own right would send a message." His framing caught me off guard. Tyler rarely took such clear positions on family conflicts, preferring to maintain diplomatic neutrality. What message would that be exactly? That you're not defined by their narrative, that you can occupy healthcare spaces on your own terms. That success doesn't have to look the way they insisted it should. I was momentarily speechless at his unexpected advocacy. "That's surprisingly insightful, Ty." "I'm not completely blind to the dynamics," he replied, a hint of defensiveness in his tone. "I just have a different strategy for navigating them." "Compliance as survival technique," I observed, not unkindly. "Something like that." He paused, then added more hesitantly, "There's something else you should know. The Mercer acquisition, interest isn't a coincidence." This caught my attention immediately. "What do you mean?" "Braden Mercer and Dad have known each other for years, medical conference connections. After seeing the Lamborghini at graduation and hearing about the journal ranking this morning, Dad apparently called Mercer directly." I felt a chill of understanding. "To what end exactly?" Tyler hesitated again. "It's complicated. I think part of him genuinely believes he's helping you by connecting your company with a major player. But there's also control," I finished for him. "If my company gets acquired by someone in his network, it validates his influence. Makes my success part of his narrative rather than a challenge to it." "Essentially, yes," Tyler admitted, though I doubt he would articulate it that way even to himself. The revelation wasn't entirely surprising, yet it added another layer of complexity to the situation. My father was adaptable, if nothing else. If he couldn't dismiss my success, he would find a way to incorporate it into his own story, as something he'd facilitated through his connections, his guidance, his influence, however distant. "Thank you for telling me," I said, genuinely appreciative of Tyler's transparency despite the uncomfortable information. "That changes how I'll approach the Mercer discussions." "You're still going to take the meeting?" he asked, sounding surprised. "Of course. Mercer Global is the industry leader for a reason. Their interest is significant regardless of how it originated. I'll just be more circumspect about their motivations and timeline." We spoke for a few more minutes, Tyler sharing additional details about our father's reaction to the journal ranking and the upcoming gala. By the time we hung up, I had a clearer picture of the complex chess game unfolding, my father attempting to recapture control of a narrative that had slipped from his grasp, my success forcing a renegotiation of the family mythology about my departure from medicine. The timing of these developments, the journal ranking, the Times interview request, the Mercer acquisition interest, all converging immediately after the public rejection at Tyler's graduation, felt almost orchestrated in its narrative perfection. Not because I had planned it that way, but because years of work were suddenly bearing fruit at the precise moment when validation felt most personally significant. I spent the rest of the day considering my options. The gala invitation represented more than a social obligation. It was a test of how I would engage with family dynamics now that the power balance had shifted. The Times interview offered an opportunity to define my professional narrative on my own terms, regardless of my family's attempts to control it. The Mercer acquisition interest, while potentially transformative for my company, now carried additional complexities given my father's involvement. By evening, I had made several decisions. I would attend the gala, not as the dutiful daughter seeking parental approval, but as a healthcare innovator in my own right. I would proceed with the Times interview, maintaining focus on the technology while acknowledging my medical background without delving into family conflicts. And I would approach the Mercer discussions with careful attention to maintaining my company's autonomy and mission, regardless of my father's behind-the-scenes maneuvering. As I drafted my RSVP to the gala invitation, I chose my wording deliberately. I will attend to celebrate advances in medical leadership. I will be bringing Maya Chen, Health Tech Innovations COO, as my guest. The inclusion of Maya, my brilliant, outspoken business partner who had been with me since the company's formation, was intentional. She would provide both moral support and a visible reminder that my success had been built through genuine partnership and innovation, not family connections. My phone buzzed with a text from Madeline just as I was sealing the envelope. DEFCON 1. Mom found your company profile in Forbes 30 Under 30 issue I left accidentally on coffee table. Currently redecorating living room shelves to add your press mentions like they've been there all along. Dad pretending not to notice. This family needs therapy. I laughed out loud at her precise observation, a wave of affection washing over me for my youngest sibling. Madeline saw our family's dysfunction with remarkable clarity for her age, her perspective unclouded by the years of conditioning Tyler and I had navigated. Photographic evidence requested, I replied, smiling at the mental image of my mother, suddenly incorporating my long-ignored professional achievements into the carefully curated family display. Minutes later, Madeline sent a photo of the living room bookshelf where family achievements were prominently displayed. My father's medical awards, Tyler's academic honors, my mother's charity recognition plaques, and now, wedged somewhat awkwardly between them, several magazine features about health tech innovations, arranged as though they had always been part of the collection. Historical revisionism in progress, Madeline captioned the image. Next. Week they'll have always supported your innovative approach to healthcare challenges. Her assessment was likely accurate. My parents excelled at adapting the family narrative to incorporate uncomfortable realities once they became impossible to ignore. My success, now publicly validated by respected institutions, would be retroactively embraced as part of the Walker legacy rather than a deviation from it. The thought held both humor and a certain melancholy. The recognition that even this moment of professional validation would be subtly reshaped to fit their preferred storyline. Not as independent achievement, built despite their opposition, but as an expected outcome of Walker family excellence, merely expressed through unconventional channels. As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought me to this crossroads. 4 years ago, walking away from medical school had felt like stepping off a cliff into darkness. Terrifying, irrevocable, potentially catastrophic. My parents' disapproval had been crushing, their certainty about my inevitable failure absolute. Yet here I stood, having built something meaningful and increasingly recognized, forcing a recalibration of that original narrative, not through argument or rebellion, but through the undeniable evidence of impact and success. The Lamborghini that had so startled my father at the graduation was just the most visible symbol of that unexpected trajectory, the tangible proof that defying his prescribed path hadn't led to the failure he'd predicted. The week ahead would bring new challenges, navigating the Times interview without feeding family conflict, approaching the Mercer acquisition discussions with clear boundaries, attending the gala with the confidence my accomplishments had earned. But for the first time, I felt fully equipped to face these challenges on my own terms, neither seeking parental approval nor defining myself in opposition to it, but simply moving forward as the person and professional I had chosen to become. As I drifted toward sleep, a phrase from the journal ranking article floated through my mind. Sometimes the most significant innovations come from those willing to step outside established pathways. The writer had been referring to our company's technological approach, but the observation applied equally well to the personal journey that had made that innovation possible. Stepping outside established pathways, familial, educational, professional, had been the most difficult and ultimately most rewarding decision of my life. Whatever came next, that fundamental truth would remain unchanged, a private victory more meaningful than any public validation could ever be. The week passed in a blur of meetings and product development sessions. Our executive retreat at a converted farmhouse in the Hudson Valley had proven unexpectedly productive, with the leadership team aligned on our expansion strategy for the coming year. By Friday afternoon, I was reviewing the final preparations for Monday's hospital implementation. In Chicago, when Maya appeared in my office doorway, "Your brother's here," she announced, curiosity evident in her tone. "Should I send him in, or are you too busy plotting world domination?" I glanced up in surprise. Tyler wasn't due in the city until tomorrow for his medical conference. Of course, send him in. Tyler appeared moments later, looking oddly out of place in my sleek office with his rumpled blazer and the slightly disheveled appearance of someone who'd been traveling all day. He carried a messenger bag slung across his chest, the same one he'd had since undergraduate years, and his expression held a tension I hadn't seen at his graduation. "This is quite the empire you've built," he remarked, looking around at the glass-walled space with its views of the Manhattan skyline. Mom's description didn't do it justice. I stood to hug him, genuinely pleased despite my surprise. "You're early. I thought your conference didn't start until tomorrow." "It doesn't." He dropped his bag on one of the chairs facing my desk and ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I recognized from childhood. "I caught an earlier flight. Needed some breathing room." Something in his tone alerted me that this wasn't a casual visit. "Everything okay?" He shrugged, a non-committal gesture that reminded me powerfully of our father avoiding difficult conversations. "Mind if we grab dinner? I could use a drink and some sister wisdom." Sister wisdom is always available, though its quality varies, depending on blood alcohol content, I replied lightly, trying to ease the tension evident in his posture. "Let me wrap up a few things here, and we can head out." While I finished my work, Tyler wandered around my office, examining the framed articles and industry awards with an attention that seemed almost studious. "It's strange," he said finally, "seeing all this evidence of your life. A whole world I know almost nothing about." The comment held no accusation, just a quiet acknowledgement of the distance that had grown between us. Partly geography, but mostly the divergent paths we'd chosen and the family dynamics that had made genuine communication difficult. "You could have visited before now," I pointed out gently. "The door's always been open." He nodded, still studying a framed photo of my leadership team from our company retreat last fall. "I know, it felt complicated, like I'd be betraying them somehow. I didn't need to ask who them referred to. And now?" He turned, meeting my gaze directly. "Now I'm wondering if I've been betraying myself instead." The statement hung in the air between us, weighted with implications I couldn't yet interpret. Rather than pressing, I finished my work, shut down my computer, and grabbed my jacket. "Come on, I know a place where the drinks are strong and the pasta is worth every carb." An hour later, we were settled in a corner booth at Vincenzo's, a small Italian restaurant in the West Village that had become my go-to spot for comfort food and privacy. The owner, Marco, had seated us in the back room where the lighting was dim and conversations couldn't be overheard, a courtesy he extended to regular customers he particularly liked. Tyler had been uncharacteristically quiet during the walk from my office, responding to my casual questions about the conference and his residency plans with distracted monosyllables. It wasn't until we'd ordered and the waiter had delivered our drinks, a Negroni for me, a double whiskey neat for him, that he seemed ready to talk. "I'm thinking about turning down the Johns Hopkins residency," he said abruptly, staring into his glass as though it might contain either validation or condemnation. I managed to hide my shock, taking a deliberate sip of my cocktail before responding. "That's unexpected. Hopkins has one of the top neurosurgery programs in the country. Dad pulled every string he has to get you that spot." "That's part of the problem," Tyler replied, finally looking up. "He pulled strings, made calls, leveraged connections. It's always been about his legacy, his reputation, not about what I want." "And what do you want?" I asked quietly, realizing how rarely anyone in our family had posed that simple question to him. He exhaled slowly, as though releasing a breath he'd been holding for years. "That's just it. I don't know anymore. I've been following this path for so long, the one that was laid out for me before I could even walk, that I'm not sure which parts are my genuine interests and which are just programming." The vulnerability in his admission was startling. Tyler had always been the good son, the one who followed directions, who met expectations without complaint. To hear him questioning the very foundations of his identity was both concerning and oddly validating. "When did these doubts start?" I asked, genuinely curious. He traced a pattern in the condensation on the table, considering the question. "They've always been there, I think. Just buried under layers of approval and achievement. But they've gotten louder recently." He paused, then added quietly, "Especially since your car made its dramatic appearance at graduation." I couldn't help but laugh. "My Lamborghini is making everyone in this family question their life choices, apparently." His smile was fleeting but genuine. "It's not the car itself, it's what it represents. You walked away from everything they planned for you, everything they valued, and built something successful on your own terms. Something that matters." He took a long sip of his whiskey. "Meanwhile, I've done everything exactly according to their blueprint, and I'm empty." The raw honesty in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't just career uncertainty. This was an existential crisis. "Medicine isn't a bad choice, Ty," I said carefully, "if it's what you genuinely want. The question is whether neurosurgery is your passion or Dad's ambition for you." "That's just it. I don't know anymore." His frustration was palpable. "I like medicine. I'm good at it. But neurosurgery, the 100-hour weeks, the God complex that seems mandatory, that feels like his dream, not mine." Our food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. When the waiter departed, Tyler continued as though there had been no interruption. "I've been shadowing in different departments during my final rotations. Last month, I spent 2 weeks in pediatric oncology. The work was heartbreaking but meaningful. In a way, neurosurgery never has been for me. The connection with patients, the continuity of care, the blend of clinical skill and emotional intelligence, it felt right. Like I'd finally found a space within medicine that resonated with the person I actually am, not the one Dad wants me to be." I listened attentively, recognizing the weight of his confession. For Tyler to even consider deviating from our father's carefully orchestrated plan was unprecedented. The risks were substantial, not just professional, but personal. Our parents' approval had always been conditional on compliance with their expectations. I had forfeited that approval years ago. Tyler never had. "Have you talked to Dad about this?" I asked, already anticipating the answer. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "I tried. Once. He shut it down immediately. Said pediatrics was a waste of my potential, and that Walker men are surgeons, not glorified pediatricians." Then he launched into his usual speech about legacy and excellence, and how he'd called in favors to secure my Hopkins spot. The response was so characteristically Richard Walker that I could almost hear our father's dismissive tone. And, Mom? You know Mom. She just reinforces whatever Dad decides. He pushed his pasta around his plate, appetite apparently diminished by the conversation. The irony is, after seeing your company, Dad's been on this kick about innovation and impact. He keeps talking about the measurable difference your technology is making. But when I suggest that I might have more impact in pediatric oncology than neurosurgery, suddenly impact isn't the priority anymore. The contradiction was indeed striking, though not surprising. Our father's sudden interest in my company's impact was about validating his parental narrative, finding a way to claim some credit for my success now that it had become undeniable. It had nothing to do with genuinely re-examining his values. "So, what are you thinking of doing?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral despite the protective instinct that surged at seeing my brother so conflicted. Tyler drained his whiskey and signaled for another before answering. "I don't know. The rational move would be to take the Hopkins residency, excel, make Dad happy, and then subspecialize in pediatric neurosurgery as a compromise. But that still means years of training in a specialty I'm not passionate about, still means living someone else's definition of success." I considered his dilemma, thinking about my own journey. You know, when I left medical school, the hardest part wasn't figuring out what I wanted to do next. It was giving myself permission to want something different than what they'd planned, for me. He nodded slowly. "That's exactly it. Every time I think about declining Hopkins, I hear Dad's voice in my head telling me I'm throwing away my future, embarrassing the family, wasting my potential." The same things he said to me, I observed, memories of those painful confrontations still vivid years later. "But you did it anyway," Tyler said, studying me with new interest. "You walked away from everything they valued and built something new. How did you find the courage?" The question gave me pause. I'd never framed my decision to leave medicine as courageous, more as desperate self-preservation, a recognition that continuing on that path would slowly extinguish whatever light remained in me. "It wasn't a single moment of courage," I said finally. "It was 1,000 tiny moments of clarity, realizing that I was miserable pursuing someone else's dream, understanding that their approval would always be conditional on my compliance, accepting that I could either please them or be true to myself, but not both." Tyler absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. "And you don't regret it? Even with everything it cost? The estrangement from Mom and Dad? The judgment from family friends? The financial instability of those first couple of years?" I smiled wryly. "No, I don't regret it. The freedom to build a life that aligns with my values has been worth every difficult moment." Our conversation paused as the waiter delivered Tyler's second whiskey and cleared our barely touched plates. When he'd gone, Tyler leaned forward, his expression newly determined. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." I nodded, intrigued by his intensity. "Always. If I decide to switch to pediatrics, to turn down Hopkins, would you support me? Not just emotionally, but if Dad follows. Threw on his threat to cut me off financially?" The question caught me off guard. "Dad threatened to cut you off? When did this happen?" Tyler looked uncomfortable. "Last night. I finally gathered the courage to tell him I was seriously considering pediatric oncology instead of neurosurgery. He didn't take it well. Said if I was determined to embarrass the family and waste my education, I could do it without his financial support. The familiar tactics, emotional manipulation, financial threats, appeals to family reputation, were exactly what our father had deployed when I'd announced my decision to leave medicine. The pattern was so predictable it would have been comical if it weren't so damaging. Of course I'd support you, I said without hesitation. Whatever you need, a place to stay, living expenses while you sort things out, connections to pediatric oncology programs, consider it done. The relief that washed over his features made me realize how genuinely concerned he'd been about facing our parents' disapproval without any safety net. Thank you, he said quietly. I wasn't sure, given how distant we've been these past few years. That distance was circumstantial, not intentional, I assured him. You were deep in medical school. I was building a company. And yes, the family situation complicated things. But you're still my brother, Ty. That hasn't changed. He smiled, the tension in his shoulders visibly easing. I've missed you, Em. More than I realized until recently. I've missed you too, I admitted, surprised by the emotion that rose unbidden at his words. And for what it's worth, I think you'd be an exceptional pediatric oncologist. You've always had an empathy that Dad lacks, a genuine connection with people rather than just clinical problems to solve. Tyler absorbed this assessment, something like hope flickering across his features. That's what Melissa says too. She thinks I've been trying to force myself into Dad's mold for too long. Smart woman, you're Melissa, I observed. I liked her. Message after the graduation, by the way. Takes courage to reach out to the family pariah. He winced at my characterization. You're not a pariah. You're just the one who got away. The one who proved there's life outside the Walker family plan. And now you're considering a jailbreak of your own, I said with a smile, trying to lighten the mood. How scandalous. 2 Walker children pursuing their own paths? Whatever. Will the country club set think? He laughed, the sound genuine and unburdened for the first time since he'd arrived at my office. Dad will probably tell everyone I'm having a nervous breakdown. Mom will tactfully change the subject whenever anyone asks about my career. And you'll be doing work you find meaningful while they figure out how to spin it into something that doesn't damage their carefully curated image, I concluded. Trust me, they're adaptable when they need to be. They've already started the process with me. Did you know Dad's been reading my company's research publications? Tyler looked surprised. Seriously? The man who told you that leaving medicine was abandoning real science for Silicon Valley nonsense? The very same. Apparently, peer-reviewed validation makes even Silicon Valley nonsense worthy of his attention. I couldn't keep the satisfaction from my voice. Though he's still trying to insert himself by arranging meetings with his connections, as though I need his network to succeed at this point. Classic Dad, Tyler observed. He can't just be proud of what you've built. He has to find a way to claim some ownership of it. The insight was perceptive, more evidence that Tyler had a deeper understanding of our family dynamics than I'd given him credit for. Perhaps his compliance hadn't been naivete but strategic. Survival, a different approach to the same oppressive expectations I'd confronted more directly. We lingered over coffee and dessert, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. His upcoming conference, my company's expansion plans, Melissa's research in infectious disease, Madeline's summer internship at an environmental nonprofit. It felt like rediscovering a friendship that had been dormant, but not lost. The easy rapport of siblings who share a unique understanding of each other's formative experiences. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, Tyler hesitated. There's one more thing I wanted to talk to you about. Dad mentioned he and Mom visited your apartment last weekend. I nodded, curious about where this was heading. An unexpected Sunday. Surprise. They saw the Lamborghini at graduation and suddenly developed an interest in my work. Dad's been different since that visit, Tyler said carefully. He pulled me into his study when I went over for dinner on Tuesday. Showed me your company's website, those journal articles you published, even a financial analysis he'd apparently commissioned about healthcare technology valuations. This was unexpected. A financial analysis? That sounds suspiciously like research. It was definitely research, Tyler confirmed. But here's the weird part. He seemed genuinely impressed. Not just with the business metrics, but with the clinical impact data. He kept focusing on the patient outcome improvements, the reduction in adverse events. Said it was statistically significant innovation, and that you had identified a critical gap in patient monitoring protocols. Coming from Richard Walker, this was unprecedented praise, especially for work outside his sanctioned field of medicine. That's surprising. It gets stranger, Tyler continued. He asked me if I thought you would consider collaborating with his department on a neurosurgical application of your monitoring technology. Said the predictive algorithms could be revolutionary for post-operative complication prevention. I stared at my brother, trying to process this information. He wants to collaborate, professionally, with his disappointment of a daughter who abandoned medicine? His words were, "Emma has developed a technology with significant implications for surgical outcomes. It would be short-sighted to ignore its potential applications in neurosurgery simply because of personal disagreements." Tyler's impression of our father's clipped, authoritative tone was unnervingly accurate. "Personal disagreements," I repeated, unable to suppress a laugh at the extreme understatement of years of criticism and estrangement. "That's quite the reframing." Tyler shrugged. "It's the closest thing to an admission of error you're likely to get from Richard Walker, MD, facts. The man physically cannot say the words 'I was wrong' without experiencing anaphylaxis." His dry assessment was so accurate I had to laugh again. True enough, though I'm not sure what to make of this sudden professional interest. Is it genuine recognition of the work, or just another attempt to insert himself now that it's proven successful? "Probably both," Tyler acknowledged. "But I do think seeing the actual impact data changed something for him. Dad's always been driven by measurable outcomes, by tangible evidence. Your company's results speak a language he understands, even if it took him years to bother listening." We stepped out into the cool evening air, the restaurant's warm glow, fading behind us as we began walking toward my apartment. The streets of the West Village were alive with Friday night energy, couples strolling hand in hand, groups of friends laughing outside bars, musicians performing on corners. "So what's your next move?" I asked as we navigated the bustling sidewalk. "With the residency decision, I mean." Tyler was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I think I need to be honest with myself in a way I haven't been allowed to be before. Really examine what I want from medicine, from my career, from my life." He glanced at me. "I've spent so long trying to satisfy their expectations that I've lost track of my own desires. That kind of self-examination can be terrifying," I warned, "but also incredibly liberating." "I've seen that in you," he admitted. "The liberation part. You seem whole in a way that I don't feel. Like you're living from a centered place instead of constantly looking outside yourself for validation." His observation was surprisingly insightful, highlighting an inner journey that had paralleled my external one of building a company. "It didn't happen overnight," I cautioned. "There were a lot of difficult moments, a lot of second-guessing, especially in those early years when the business was struggling, and I wondered if they'd been right all along." "But you pushed through," he noted, "stayed true to your vision, even when it would have been easier to admit defeat and crawl back to the path they'd chosen." "I did," I acknowledged, though not without help. I had mentors, investors who believed in the technology, an incredible team. I nudged his shoulder gently. "And you won't be alone either, whatever you decide." We'd reached my building, the doorman nodding in recognition as we approached. In the lobby, Tyler hesitated. "Would it be okay if I stayed with you this weekend? The conference hotel doesn't start until tomorrow night, and He trailed off, uncharacteristically. "Uncertain. Need some space from the parental pressure campaign?" I suggested, understanding immediately. "Of course. The guest room is all yours." His relief was palpable. "Thanks, Em. It helps, being around someone who's been through this and came out the other side still standing. Still whole." In my apartment, I showed Tyler to the guest room, then made us both tea, a nighttime ritual I'd adopted in those first anxious months after leaving medical school, when sleep had been elusive and doubts had loomed large in the darkness. We sat in comfortable silence on my balcony, watching the city lights shimmer against the night sky. "You know," I said finally, "whatever you decide about the residency, the hardest part will be accepting that their disapproval doesn't define you, that you can make choices they don't understand or support, and still be worthy, still be successful, still be happy." He nodded slowly, absorbing this. "How long did it take you to really believe that?" I considered the question, thinking back to the gradual shift from defiance mingled with doubt to genuine self-trust. Honestly, until quite recently. Maybe until the moment I drove that ridiculous car to Tyler's graduation and decided I was done hiding any part of myself or my success to make others comfortable. "The Lamborghini as existential statement," he said with a small smile. "Not exactly subtle, but undeniably effective." "Sometimes the universe needs a clear message," I replied, returning his smile. "And sometimes you need to be the one to deliver it." We talked late into the night, the conversation flowing between practical considerations, residency options, financial implications, professional networks, and deeper reflections on family dynamics, personal identity, and the courage required to define success on one's own terms. It was the kind of honest exchange that had been impossible within the carefully controlled environment of our parents' home, where authentic self-expression had always been subordinate to appearance and expectation. As Tyler finally headed to bed around 2 a.m., visibly lighter than when he'd arrived at my office, he paused in the hallway. "Hey, Em. Thank you, not just for the place to stay, but for seeing me, the real me, not just the role I've been playing." The simple gratitude in his voice touched something deep within me. A recognition that perhaps the most valuable thing I could offer my brother wasn't financial support or professional connections, but simply the space to be authentic, to question, to choose his own path without judgment. "Anytime, Ty," I replied softly. "That's what family is supposed to be." The irony wasn't lost on either of us, that we had to step outside our biological family's rigid expectations to discover what genuine family support actually felt like. But as I prepared for bed myself, I felt an unexpected sense of peace settling over me. The journey I'd begun alone was expanding to include others, Tyler questioning his predetermined path, Madeline watching and learning from both our examples, perhaps even our parents beginning to glimpse, however reluctantly, that success could take forms they hadn't sanctioned or imagined. Tomorrow would bring new conversations, new possibilities, new challenges. But for tonight, it was enough to know that the courage to define one's own path wasn't just an individual act of defiance, but potentially the beginning of a different kind of family legacy. One built on authenticity rather than appearance, on self-determination rather than external validation. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself thinking of the Lamborghini gathering dust in my building's garage, a T symbol that had taken on meanings I never intended when I purchased it as a simple celebration of hard-won success. In our family's complex emotional economy, that car had somehow become a catalyst for long-overdue conversations, for questioning assumptions, for recognizing worth beyond predetermined paths. Sometimes transformation came from unexpected sources. Sometimes the most powerful statement wasn't a carefully crafted argument, but simply the unapologetic evidence of a life well lived on one's own terms. Sunday morning dawned with unexpected clarity after the emotional intensity of our late-night conversation. I found Tyler already awake, sipping coffee on the balcony, his medical conference materials spread across the table as he prepared for his presentation. The comfortable silence between us felt like rediscovering something long forgotten. The easy companionship we'd shared as children before parental expectations had driven us onto separate paths. "Any epiphanies overnight?" I asked, pouring myself coffee from the carafe he'd thoughtfully prepared. He smiled ruefully. "No lightning bolts of certainty, if that's what you mean, but I did sleep better than I have in months." He gestured to the city sprawled before us. "There's something freeing about physical distance from the situation, you know? Like I can actually hear myself think without Dad's disapproval drowning everything out." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. My own clarity had increased exponentially with each mile that separated me from our parents' carefully cultivated expectations. Distance helps. So does time. "And supportive siblings," he added with a meaningful glance. "I've been thinking about what you said last night about defining success on my own terms. That's the part I'm struggling with most. Every metric I've ever used to measure my worth has been externally imposed." "Welcome to deprogramming from the Walker family value system," I replied, only half joking. "It's a process." We spent the morning in companionable productivity, Tyler reviewing his conference presentation while I handled emails that had accumulated over the weekend. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Madeline. "SOS. Dad on warpath about Tyler. Mom. Crying. Apparently, he's throwing away his future just like Emma did." "What is happening?" I showed the message to Tyler, who winced. "I should have expected this. Dad must have called the program director at Hopkins to confirm my deferral request." "You submitted a deferral request? When did this happen?" "Last night after our talk. I sent an email to Dr. Steinman explaining that I'm considering a different specialty and requesting a 1-year deferral to explore alternative paths." The decisiveness of this action surprised me. "That's a significant step, Ty." He nodded, looking simultaneously terrified and relieved. It felt right. Not permanent, not burning bridges, just creating space to make a conscious choice rather than continuing on autopilot. I texted Madeline back. "Tyler's exploring different medical specialties. Normal career discernment. Parents overreacting. You okay?" Her response was immediate. "They're acting like he committed a crime. Dad keeps saying, 'First Emma, now Tyler,' like you both have some contagious rebellion disease. Should I be worried?" I smiled despite the situation. "Tell them Tyler's with me in NYC. We're both fine. This is about professional choices, not family loyalty. Hang in there." Tyler read over my shoulder, his expression troubled. "I hate that she's caught in the crossfire." "Madeline's tougher than she looks," I assured him. "And she's got a front row seat to their manipulation tactics, which is actually educational. Seeing how they react when someone deviates from their script, it clarifies things." As if on cue, my phone rang with our father's distinctive ringtone. Tyler and I exchanged glances. "Speaker?" I suggested. He nodded, his expression resolute. I answered with deliberate casualness. "Good morning, Dad." "Is your brother with you?" No greeting, no preamble, just the clipped demand of a man accustomed to immediate compliance. "Yes, Tyler's here. You're on speaker." A momentary pause, then, "Tyler, I've just spoken with Lawrence Steinman. He tells me you've requested a deferral of your residency position, a position I personally helped secure for you." The emphasis on his role in the arrangement was typical. Every opportunity in our family came with the weight of obligation attached. "That's correct," Tyler replied, his voice steadier than I expected given the circumstances. "I'm considering my options." "There are no options to consider." Our father's tone had shifted from controlled anger to incredulous disbelief. "This is Johns Hopkins neurosurgery. People would kill for this spot. I had to call in significant favors." "I know, Dad," Tyler interrupted, something he rarely dared to do. And I appreciate the effort. But I need to make sure I'm choosing the right specialty for me, not just following the path of least resistance. Path of least resistance? The indignation was palpable even through the phone's speaker. There is nothing least resistant about neurosurgery. It's the most demanding, prestigious. That's exactly my point, Tyler interjected again. It's prestigious. It carries the Walker name forward in the right circles. But is it where I'll make the most meaningful contribution? Where I'll find personal fulfillment? Those are legitimate questions I need to answer. The silence that followed was weighted with tension. I could almost see our father's expression, the tightening around his eyes, the rigid set of his jaw, when confronted with unexpected opposition. "This is your sister's influence," he said finally, voice cold with certainty. "She walks away from medicine, builds some tech company, shows up in an ostentatious sports car, and suddenly you're questioning your entire career trajectory." I opened my mouth to defend myself, but Tyler beat me to it. "Emma has nothing to do with my decision," he stated firmly, though seeing her succeed on her own terms has been illuminating. "This is about me figuring out what kind of doctor I want to be." "You want to be the best," our father replied automatically. "A leader in your field. A walker." "I want to be fulfilled," Tyler countered. "I want to wake up excited about my work, not just obligated to it." Is that really so unreasonable? Another tense silence, then our father's voice again, now shifted into the reasonable, persuasive tone he used with difficult patients or resistant hospital administrators. "Tyler, every young doctor has moments of uncertainty. It's natural to question your path. But making impulsive decisions that compromise your future is not the answer. Take the Hopkins position. If after your first year you still feel this way, we can discuss alternatives then." It was a strategic retreat, offering apparent flexibility, while still insisting on compliance with the original plan. I'd heard this exact approach when I'd first expressed doubts about medical school. Tyler glanced at me, clearly recognizing the manipulation tactic as well. "I appreciate your concern, Dad, but I've made my decision. I'm taking a year to explore pediatric oncology and other specialties that might be a better fit for me." "Pediatrics?" The disgust in our father's voice was unmistakable. "You want to trade neurosurgery for runny noses and ear infections?" "Pediatric oncology," Tyler corrected calmly. "Complex cases, challenging diagnoses, meaningful patient relationships, and yes, sometimes difficult outcomes. But work that resonates with who I am, not just what our family expects me to be." The line went quiet again, this time for so long I wondered if the call had disconnected. Finally, our father spoke, his tone now frigid with controlled fury. "You should know that if you decline Hopkins, I won't be able to help you secure another position of comparable quality. You'll be on your own." Tyler met my eyes across the table, resolve hardening his expression. "I understand, and I accept that consequence." "And the financial support we discussed for your first year of residency, that was predicated on Hopkins, specifically." The implied threat was clear, but Tyler didn't flinch. "I figured as much. I'll manage." A sharp exhalation on the other end of the line. "Your mother is extremely upset by this development. I suggest you call her later to explain." Yourself. Translation. I've told your mother to be upset as an additional lever of emotional manipulation. "I'll call Mom this evening," Tyler promised, his voice softening slightly. "Please tell her I'm sorry for any distress, but this is a professional decision I need to make for myself. We'll discuss this further when you return to Philadelphia," our father stated, clearly unwilling to accept that the matter was settled. "In the meantime, I suggest you think very carefully about what you're risking. Specialized medical positions aren't like your sister's. Entrepreneurial ventures. You can't just create your own path in established medicine." I raised an eyebrow. at this characterization of my company, successful enough to impress him privately, apparently, but still dismissed as an entrepreneurial venture when it suited his narrative. "I'll give it serious thought," Tyler assured him, though his expression made it clear his decision was already made. "Goodbye, Dad." After he hung up, we sat in silence for a moment, processing the conversation. Finally, I raised my coffee mug in a toast. "Congratulations. You've officially joined the ranks of Walker children who prioritize personal fulfillment over parental approval. It's a small but growing club." He clinked his mug against mine, a mix of emotions playing across his features. Anxiety, relief, determination. I did it. I actually stood my ground. "You did," I confirmed. And rather impressively, I might add. "There was a time when Dad's disapproval would have had you backtracking within seconds." "I still felt that pull," he admitted. "That instinctive need to please him, to be the good son. But somehow, having you here made it easier to resist." His words touched me more deeply than I expected. For years, I'd carried the weight of being the family disappointment alone, my choices framed as selfish rebellion rather than legitimate self-determination. Having Tyler not just understand, but begin to follow a similar path of authentic choice felt like validation I hadn't known I was seeking. "So what now?" I asked. "Practically speaking," he ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "I need to finalize this deferral or decline the Hopkins spot entirely. Research pediatric oncology programs. Figure out living arrangements if Dad follows through on cutting financial support. You can stay with me as long as you need," I offered. "Immediately. And I have connections at Memorial Sloan Kettering if you want to explore their pediatric oncology department." His expression softened with gratitude. "Thank you for all of it. The support, the example, not saying 'I told you so' about Dad's reaction." "Would I do that?" I asked innocently. "In a heartbeat," he replied with a grin. "And you'd be entitled to. You warned me years ago that his support was conditional on compliance. I just wasn't ready to hear it then." My phone buzzed with another text from Madeline. "Dad just got off the phone looking like he swallowed a wasp. Mom locked herself in their bedroom. Is Tyler getting disowned too? If so, can I be next? This family is exhausting." I showed Tyler the message, and we both laughed despite the tension of the situation. "Should we adopt Madeline?" he suggested. "Form our own splinter. Family of Walker outcasts? She'll be joining us soon enough," I predicted. Her environmental science dreams don't exactly align with Dad's vision of success either. Speaking of which, want to place bets on how long before he calls back with a new approach? I give it 2 hours, tops. Tyler considered this. "I think he'll wait until this evening. Let the silent treatment work its magic first. Then he'll call with the 'I'm disappointed but willing to discuss reasonable compromises' voice." Good prediction. Classic Richard Walker strategic retreat. Before the flanking maneuver. We spent the rest of the afternoon helping Tyler refine his conference presentation while strategizing his career pivot. I connected him with colleagues at several leading hospitals with strong pediatric oncology programs, and we drafted a thoughtful email to Dr. Steinman at Hopkins, confirming his decision to decline the neurosurgery position while expressing appropriate gratitude for the opportunity. As predicted, our father called again that evening, his tone markedly different, conciliatory, almost understanding. The offer: Tyler could pursue a pediatric specialty if he insisted, but within the neurosurgical field. Pediatric neurosurgery at Hopkins would maintain the family's standing while accommodating Tyler's newfound interest in children's medicine. It was a masterful attempt at compromise that wasn't actually a compromise at all, appearing to bend, while still insisting on the essential elements of the original plan. Tyler handled it with remarkable composure, thanking our father for the suggestion but firmly reiterating his decision to explore pediatric oncology specifically. By the time he hung up, Tyler looked emotionally drained but resolute. That was harder than the first call, he admitted. When he's angry, it's easier to stand firm. When he pretends to understand and support while subtly undermining my choice, that's when the self-doubt creeps in. Welcome to Advanced Manipulation 501, I said dryly. Dad's specialty. He perfected that technique during my college years. Of course you should follow your interests, Emma. Have you considered how biomedical engineering might be a more practical application of your talent for innovation? Tyler laughed in recognition. The illusion of choice within carefully controlled parameters. He's very good at that. Years of practice, I confirmed. But you did well. Stayed focused on your actual decision rather than getting drawn into debating his counteroffer. As the evening progressed, our conversation shifted from family dynamics to more forward-looking topics. Tyler's genuine excitement about pediatric oncology, my company's upcoming expansion, our shared hope that Madeline would find her own authentic path with perhaps less family drama than we had each endured. When my phone rang again around 9, I expected another call from our parents. Instead, Melissa's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, Emma," she said when I answered. "Is Tyler with you?" He's not answering his phone, and his parents just called, me asking if I know where he is. They sound concerned. The carefully chosen word made me smile. Concerned likely meant some combination of angry, controlling, and determined to locate their wayward son. "He's here," I confirmed. "Safe. And sound. Just making some career decisions that aren't going over well in certain parental quarters." "Ah," she replied, understanding immediately. "The pediatric oncology conversation happened then. How did it go?" "About as expected. Dire warnings, financial threats, attempts at compromise that aren't actually compromises. The usual Walker family negotiation tactics." She sighed. "I figured as much when his dad called me directly. He tried to recruit me to help Tyler see reason, his exact words. I told him Tyler is perfectly capable of making his own professional decisions. I liked her more with every interaction. Well played. Want me to put him on?" After they spoke briefly, with Tyler reassuring her that he was fine and would see her tomorrow at the conference, we settled back into conversation. "Melissa seems great," I observed. Refreshingly direct. Tyler's expression softened. "She is? Kind of reminds me of you, actually. Doesn't tolerate nonsense. Sees through the family dynamics almost immediately. Smart man, finding a partner who calls out the dysfunction instead of enabling it?" I replied, genuinely impressed by his choice. "That's half the battle right there." "She's been encouraging me to make this change for months," he admitted. Said she could see how much the neurosurgery path was draining me rather than energizing me. The people who truly care about you want your authentic happiness, not your compliance with someone else's vision, I noted. Dad wants us to be extensions of himself. Mom wants us to maintain appropriate appearances, but actual love is wanting someone to become more fully themselves, even if that self doesn't match your expectations. Tyler considered this. You know, for someone who claims to have rejected everything about the Walker family approach to life, you certainly sound like Dad when you start philosophizing. Very authoritative, very certain. I threw a couch pillow at him, laughing despite myself. Take that back immediately. "I'm just saying some traits are genetic," he continued, grinning. "The Walker certainty, the Walker intensity. You've just redirected them toward different goals than he would have chosen." There was enough truth in his observation to give me pause. I had indeed maintained some of the characteristics our father had cultivated. The determination, the focus, the unwillingness to accept artificial limitations. I'd simply applied them to building a company that aligned with my values rather than following his prescribed career path. "Maybe you're right," I conceded. "Though I'd like to think I'm a bit more flexible about other people's life choices. Infinitely more so," he assured me. hence me being here instead of hiding in my apartment dreading another parental confrontation. My phone buzzed with an email notification, drawing my attention away from our conversation momentarily. The subject line made me sit up straighter. Philadelphia Memorial Hospital, partnership inquiry. "Everything okay?" Tyler asked, noticing my sudden focus. "Not sure yet," I replied, opening the email with curiosity. "It's from John Harrington. At Philadelphia Memorial, the connection Dad was trying to force last week." The message was brief but intriguing. "Ms. Walker, I recently became aware of your company's innovative monitoring technology through multiple channels. While I understand there was some confusion about a previously suggested meeting, I would be interested in discussing potential applications for our neurosurgical department if you're amenable. This would be a formal healthcare technology evaluation, conducted through proper channels with your technical team's involvement. Please let me know if this would be of interest. Regards, John Harrington, Chief Medical Officer, Philadelphia Memorial Hospital." I showed the email to Tyler, who read it with evident surprise. "That's unexpected, and notice he specifically mentioned proper channels and your technical team, almost like he's deliberately distancing himself from Dad's approach." "Very diplomatic," I agreed, "and potentially a significant opportunity for us. Philadelphia Memorial has an excellent neurosurgical department." "Are you going to pursue it?" Tyler asked. I considered the question carefully. "Yes, but through our standard process. I'll have Maya reach out to schedule an initial technical assessment with their IT team before we move to any clinical discussions." I began drafting a response, then paused, a thought occurring to me. Do you think Dad orchestrated this? A backdoor approach after I rejected his arranged lunch? Tyler shook his head. I doubt it. That email has the hallmarks of someone who's been awkwardly inserted into a family situation and is trying to establish a proper professional boundary. My guess is Harrington heard about your company from multiple sources, including Dad, obviously, but wants to make it clear he's approaching this as a legitimate business inquiry, not a favor to a colleague. His assessment made sense, and I finished my response accordingly, professional, appreciative of the interest, but clearly outlining our partnership evaluation process. As I sent the email, Tyler yawned widely, the emotional toll of the day finally catching up with him. I should get some sleep. Conference registration starts at 8 tomorrow. Of course, I agreed, suddenly aware of my own fatigue. Big day for both of us tomorrow. He hesitated at the entrance to the guest room. Thank you again, Em, for everything. I don't think I could have taken this step without knowing you had my back. That's what family is supposed to do, I replied simply. The real kind, not the conditional version we grew up with. After he'd gone to bed, I found myself too restless for sleep despite my exhaustion. I stepped out onto the balcony, the city lights creating a glittering panorama below. My phone showed 3 missed calls from our parents and a text from Madeline. They've moved from anger to worried planning mode. Dad's on his computer researching pediatric neurosurgery programs, still trying to find a compromise that keeps Tyler in his chosen specialty. Progress? I smiled at her perceptive update. It was progress of a sort. Our father adapting his strategy rather than simply demanding compliance was at least movement from his original position, even if the underlying control dynamic remained unchanged. The complexity of family relationships, the tangled web of love, expectation, disappointment, and growth, felt particularly vivid tonight. Tyler taking his first steps toward authentic choice. Our parents struggling to adapt their rigid framework to unexpected deviations. Madeline watching and learning from the sidelines, likely preparing her own eventual declaration of independence. And me, somehow transformed from family disappointment to reluctant role model. The irony wasn't lost on me, that by walking away from the path they'd prescribed, I'd ultimately created something more meaningful than compliance could ever have yielded. Not just a successful company, but a life aligned with my values, relationships based on authentic connection rather than performance of expected roles. The Lamborghini that had inadvertently catalyzed this family reckoning sat in the garage below, a tangible symbol of success by unconventional measures. But the real victory wasn't the car or the company or even the professional recognition. It was this moment of clarity, standing under the vast night sky, feeling wholly myself, unburdened by others' expectations, yet still connected to those who mattered most. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. For Tyler, navigating a career pivot under parental scrutiny. For me, continued growth of the company I'd built from nothing but conviction and persistence. For our family, perhaps the painful but necessary evolution from rigid hierarchy to something more flexible, more accepting, of individual differences. But tonight, in this moment of quiet reflection, I felt a profound sense of peace. Not because everything was resolved. It wasn't, and might never be completely. But because I'd learned the most essential lesson, that living authentically was its own reward, regardless of external validation or approval. The path forward wouldn't be simple or straightforward. Our parents might never fully accept our choices or understand our definitions of success. But Tyler and I had found something more valuable than their approval: the courage to define our own lives, to measure achievement by internal satisfaction rather than external metrics, to build futures that reflected our truest selves. And perhaps someday, our parents would recognize that the real legacy worth preserving wasn't a particular career path or social standing, but the integrity and courage with which their children had forged their own ways in the world. For now, it was enough to know that something fundamental had shifted, in Tyler's perspective, in my relationship with my brother, perhaps even in the subtle recalibration of our family's dynamics. Small changes that might, with time and patience, grow into more meaningful transformation. I sent a final text to Madeline before heading to bed. Progress comes in unexpected forms, sometimes even through luxury cars and family arguments. Get some rest. The Walker revolution is just beginning. Her response came seconds later. About time. Save me a spot in the Rebel Alliance. Love you. I smiled, picturing her determined expression as she typed those words from the carefully decorated bedroom in our parents' house, a temporary outpost in a life that would soon enough take its own authentic shape. Always a place for you, I texted back. Love you too. And with that quiet affirmation of the family we were creating, not by blood or obligation, but by choice and genuine support, I finally felt ready for sleep. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. Tonight, it was enough to know that sometimes the most powerful statement isn't declaring independence, but simply living it. Day by day, choice by choice, building a life that belongs wholly to oneself. Not as rejection of one's origins, but as the highest fulfillment of what family could and should be. A foundation from which to grow, not a cage in which to remain. A beginning, not a limitation. A launch point for authentic lives that honor the past without being imprisoned by it. The true measure of success wasn't the car in my garage or the company I'd built, but the freedom I'd fought for and won. The freedom to define my own path, to support others in finding theirs, to create connection based on truth rather than expectation. By that measure, standing here under the vast night sky, feeling wholly myself while extending a hand to my brother as he began his own journey of authentic choice, I had succeeded beyond anything I could have imagined when I first walked away from my parents' predetermined path, and that, far more than any external validation, was worth celebrating. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out!